From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The election was held fairly and it was good, without any troubles. My only concern is delaying the voting time in some polls. But overall it was good. We did not have such an election before.
Early results from Egypt's first post-revolutionary elections continue to come in. It looks like a big win for the Muslim Brotherhood's Party for Freedom and Justice. We'll speak with Democracy Now! Special correspondent Anjali Kamat. She's been on the ground reporting in Cairo since the fall of Mubarak.
Well, it's a historic day in Egypt today. It's the first day for the new Egypt for millions of people around the country in the city of Cairo. The entire city is celebrating. Mubarak just announced that he would resign his resignation.
Democracy Now!'s Anjali Kamat has returned to the U.S. last night from almost a year in Cairo. She joins us for the hour. We'll also discuss her experience reporting in Libya during the fall of Gaddafi, and she'll talk about her return home to India. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is in the midst of a landmark trip to Burma, the most high-level U.S. visit there in 50 years. Earlier today, Clinton began talks with the Burmese junta. Clinton said the Obama administration will not lift sanctions immediately, but is prepared to do so in the future if democratic reform is enacted.
We're not at the point yet that we can consider lifting sanctions that we have in place because of our ongoing concerns about policies that have to be reversed. But any steps that the government takes will be carefully considered and will be, as I said, matched. Because we want to see political and economic reform take hold. And I told the leadership that we will certainly consider the easing and elimination of sanctions as we go forward in this process together.
Ahead of Clinton's talks with the junta, the Burmese pro-democracy leader, the Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi, gave a rare video address from her home. Suu Kyi said she would support the lifting of sanctions if a series of conditions were met.
The United States has made it quite clear what they expect the government of Burma to do if sanctions are to be lifted, and we certainly support this. We've always said that the best way to get sanctions lifted in Burma is to meet the conditions that were set by the Congress when sanctions were imposed. For example, the release of political prisoners, negotiations with the democratic opposition, humanitarian access to conflict areas, and so on. So if these conditions are met, then the time will certainly have come for sanctions to be relaxed.
Aung San Suu Kyi says she will run for the Burmese parliament. The military junta renamed Burma Myanmar. At least 18 people were killed in separate attacks in the Iraqi province of Diyala earlier today. The violence comes amidst Vice President Joe Biden's visit to Iraq ahead of the deadline for a U.S. withdrawal at the end of the month. After a meeting with top Iraqi officials, Biden said the withdrawal will proceed on schedule.
A promise made is a promise kept, and we are keeping our promise. We kept our promise to withdraw our troops from Iraq cities in 2009. We kept our promise to end our combat mission in the summer of 2010. And now we are keeping our promise we made back in 2008 to remove our troops from Iraq by the end of this year. Our troops, as I said, are leaving Iraq, and we are embarking on a new path together, a new phase of this relationship. Relationship, again, I emphasize, between two sovereign nations.
The New York Times is reporting President Obama has ruled out an apology for the recent NATO airstrikes that killed 24 Pakistani soldiers. Officials within the State Department, as well as the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, had argued condolences were needed in order to restore relations between the two governments. Pakistan has responded to the attacks by blocking all NATO logistical supplies that cross the border into Afghanistan. On Wednesday, Pakistani officials said they've given the U.S. until December 11th to vacate a strategic airbase used to launch drone strikes in Pakistan's restive tribal region. Britain's cutting off diplomatic ties with Iran in the aftermath of the storming of the British embassy in Tehran by protesters earlier this week. Britain has now withdrawn all its staff from Tehran while also ordering the closure of the Iranian embassy in London and the expulsion of its diplomats. The move comes ahead of a key European Union meeting today where foreign ministers could approve a new round of sanctions. British Foreign Secretary William Hague said he expects to see punitive action against Iran.
I hope we will agree today additional measures that will be an intensification of the economic pressure on Iran, peaceful, legitimate economic pressure, particularly to increase the isolation of the Iranian financial sector. But that, of course, is to be discussed at the meeting.
6 of the world's major central banks, including the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank, have reached an agreement to help reduce the loaning and borrowing costs of foreign banks. The move will reduce by half the cost of an existing mechanism wherein foreign banks borrow from their own central banks after dollars are purchased from the Fed. The Obama administration is facing widespread calls to keep its pledge to actively engage in efforts for a binding agreement on the reduction of greenhouse gases at the United Nations Climate Summit in Durban, South Africa. On Wednesday, a coalition of 16 environmental groups signed a letter to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton calling the U.S., quote, a major obstacle to progress on averting environmental catastrophe. Signatories include Greenpeace USA, the Natural Resources Defense Council, Oxfam America, the Union of Concerned Scientists, and the World Wildlife Fund. The letter's release came as the European Union delegation in Durban issued a rare challenge to the U.S., urging it to uphold its promises. The European Union climate negotiator in Durban, Artur Rangmetzger, said the U.S. needs to do more on the climate.
I think what we expect from the United States is that they stick very clearly to their pledge they have been making in Cancun, and that they show very clearly that they are going to implement what they have promised in their domestic actions. I think they have taken some measures, but some more things need to be done. So that is clearly what we would expect from the United States.
In other news from Durban, South Africa, activists with Canada's Indigenous Environmental Network staged a protest Wednesday outside the local offices of the oil giant Royal Dutch Shell.
Shell's involvement in Canada, in the tar sands in northern Alberta, and their violations of human rights in Indigenous communities.
Democracy Now! Will be broadcasting from the UN Climate Conference in Durban, South Africa, beginning December 5th. That's Monday through Friday of next week. Israel's agreed to release around $100 million in Palestinian tax and customs payments it had withheld to punish the Palestinian Authority for seeking membership at the United Nations. The PA had warned the move was illegal and would again push it toward financial collapse following similar Israeli moves in the past. British public sector workers have wrapped up a 24-hour general strike that marked the largest in generations. Around 2 million teachers, hospital staff, garbage collectors, firefighters, and border guards hit the streets Wednesday in a strike organized by a coalition of 30 trade unions.
The only people who need to compromise are the bankers. They need to take the cuts for the mess they've made of our country. It's as simple as that. We have to take the strength of today and we have to go out and fight and fight and fight until we win. We are not going to give up. This is from Tahira Square. They show us the way. We will fight until we win.
Back in the United States, the total number of arrested in the raids on Occupy encampments in Los Angeles and Philadelphia early Wednesday morning has now topped 350 people. 300 were arrested when around 1,400 officers raided the Occupy LA site at City Hall. 50 people were arrested when Philadelphia police cleared the protest camp at Dilworth Plaza. To date, over 5,000 people have been arrested in Occupy Wall Street crackdowns nationwide. In related news, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg boasted to an audience at MIT Tuesday night that the New York Police Department is his own personal army. Bloomberg said, quote, "I have my own army in the NYPD, which is the 7th biggest army in the world." The mayor has been accused of using New York City's massive police department as his own private force to clear out Occupy Wall Street protesters from their home base in Lower Manhattan and execute scores of arrests throughout the city. In Arizona, police and riot gear have pepper sprayed and arrested demonstrators protesting the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC. At least 7 people were arrested Wednesday after some 200 protesters affiliated with the Occupy movement marched to a resort in Scottsdale, Arizona, where ALEC was hosting a meeting between large corporations and conservative state lawmakers to draft model bills. Republican presidential hopeful Herman Cain is vowing to stay in the race, despite the latest claims of a Georgia woman who say the two had a lengthy extramarital affair. The woman, Ginger White, says she came forward as a show of support to the 3 women who have accused Cain of sexual harassment, 2 of them publicly. To support her claims of the 13-year affair, White has produced telephone records showing multiple calls and text messages from Cain. Speaking in New Hampshire Wednesday, Cain brushed off speculation he's considering dropping out of the race.
A few of our warm weather supporters have, gotten off the Cain train. But the good news is many of our solid supporters are still on. And once we clear up this most recent accusation, I think a lot of people are going to see it for what it was worth. And then once we do that, we're still going to work hard to do well here in the great state of New Hampshire.
In Canada, new details have emerged about alleged police negligence in the case of a British Columbia serial killer who murdered scores of women. Catherine Galliford, an officer with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, says police could have nabbed the killer, Robert Pickton, more than 3 years before he was eventually arrested. According to Galliford, police had enough evidence to search Pickton's farm in 1999, but took no action. Police had already compiled a file on Pickton that included his prior arrest for stabbing a sex trade worker multiple times on his property. Despite being a potential suspect in the disappearances of a number of women who turned out to be his victims, surveillance on Pickton was halted after just 2 weeks because his trailer was located too far from a road to be visible. No further action was taken. Pickton went on to kill 14 women during the intervening period until his 2002 arrest, which itself resulted from an unrelated firearms case. The remains of 33 women were ultimately found on Pickton's farm. He claims to have killed 49 women. Galliford has also accused the officers investigating the women's disappearances of sexually harassing her, as well as neglecting the case by watching pornography on the job and leaving work early to go drinking. She's slated to testify at a public inquiry into the police handling of the murders in January. And former Salt Lake City, Utah Mayor Rocky Anderson has announced plans to run for president. Anderson says he will run for the newly formed Justice Party, which he hopes will grow into a grassroots movement. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.